The faces around the conference table turned toward me with that particular mixture of pity and discomfort that signals the end of something. My boss, Calder Whitmore, pulled my resume out of a stack of 200 and hired me the summer I graduated from Kent State with a materials engineering degree and $1,100 in my checking account. Fresh eyes build empires, he told me during that first interview, tapping his pen against my capstone project on polymer coatings. Nobody had ever said anything like that to me before. For 4 years I worked the lab floor at Whitmore Dynamics in Akron, developing a protective coating that could keep lithium battery cells stable through thousands of charge cycles without degrading. It wasn't glamorous work. It was measuring, testing, failing, measuring again. My father used to say the same thing when he taught me to use his brass calipers in his garage workshop. Measure twice. Write it down. He'd been a tool and die man his whole life, and those calipers were the only thing of his I kept after he passed. I still carried them in my lab coat pocket, the brass worn smooth where his thumb used to rest. My cubicle sat 2 rows from the fume hood, next to a corkboard pinned with test data going back 3 years. My cat, Ohm, waited for me every night in the window of my apartment on Merriman Road. My best friend at the lab, Maeve Doyle, brought me coffee every morning at 7:15 without fail. The same order: oat milk, 1 sugar, extra hot. I tell you all this because I want you to understand what 4 years of quiet, steady work looks like. Nobody claps for it. Nobody photographs it. You just show up, and you measure, and eventually something works. By the spring of this year, my coating formulation had passed every internal safety test Whitmore Dynamics could throw at it. Calder scheduled a meeting with 6 investors to secure the funding that would take it from the lab bench to a real production line. He reviewed my slides personally. He nodded at every result. "This is the one," he said. "This is the one that puts us on the map." That's when his daughter came home. Nixera Whitmore arrived 8 months earlier from an MBA program back east, installed in a corner office with a title nobody in the building could quite explain. Vice President of Strategic Innovation. Calder introduced her at an all-staff meeting with the kind of pride that makes a father's voice catch. "You're all lucky to have her instincts," he said. I tried to like her. I really did. She asked good questions in our first few meetings, the kind that made me think she was actually trying to understand the chemistry. "You're brilliant, Coralie," she told me once, leaning against my lab bench with a paper cup of coffee she never seemed to drink. "But brilliance doesn't build companies. Relationships do." I didn't know yet that those words were a warning. I've learned since then that the people who hurt you rarely start out looking like villains. They start out looking like someone worth trusting. That's the part nobody warns you about. 3 days before the investor meeting, Nixera started asking to see my project files. Not the summaries. The raw ones. My private research drive, the one only I had access to, the one where every failed formula and every small breakthrough lived in order. I gave her the access. Calder was her father. What else was I supposed to do? The morning of the investor meeting, I wore the navy blazer I'd bought specifically for this, the one still creased from the store hanger. 6 investors sat around the conference table, folders open, coffee going cold. Calder sat at the head, hands folded, looking at me the way he had the day he hired me. I stood at the front of the room and pulled up 4 years of data. Cycle testing. Thermal stability. Degradation curves that flattened out beautifully after the 2000th charge. This was the moment. I could feel it in my chest, that specific kind of quiet that comes right before something good happens. I made it 11 minutes into the presentation. The door opened without a knock. Nixera walked in wearing a cream-colored suit that looked like it cost more than my monthly rent, and she didn't look at me once. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, not sounding sorry at all. "But there's been a change of plan." I stood there with my hand still on the clicker, while she crossed to the front of the room like she'd rehearsed the walk. The investors, who a minute earlier had been leaning toward my slides, straightened up in their chairs and turned toward her instead. "My father asked me to share some exciting news," she said, still not glancing my way. We've developed an alternative approach with significantly stronger market potential. My throat went tight. She reached past me and minimized my presentation with a flick of her wrist, the same casual gesture she might use to swat away a fly. The room's attention followed her hand like it was on a string. "We don't need your ideas anymore," she said to me, low enough that only I could hear it. Then louder to the room. "Coralie's early work laid some groundwork, but we're taking things in a more innovative direction." I stood there, invisible. She pulled up slides that looked exactly like concepts from my private notebooks. Concepts I had scribbled at midnight in the margins of test logs. Concepts I had never formally presented to anyone. When she finished, one of the investors, a man named Fergus Cole, actually stood up to applaud. "This is exactly what we were hoping to see," he said, beaming at her. "Much more commercially viable." I packed my laptop with hands that didn't feel like mine while they discussed funding structures and go-to-market timelines like I wasn't standing 3 feet away. Nobody noticed when I slid my badge out of my wallet and set it quietly on the table's edge. I caught Calder's eye on my way to the door. The man who once told me fresh eyes build empires looked through me like I'd already left the building. "Enjoy the funding," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. It wasn't until I reached my car in the parking garage that my hands started shaking. I gripped the steering wheel and sat there for a long time. For years. My name on nothing. And the worst part wasn't losing the funding. The worst part was that they didn't even need me there to explain it. Now, let me back up. I didn't know yet what the next 24 hours would cost me. I only knew I had less time than I thought. I let myself into my apartment on Merriman Road and dropped my keys on the counter, staring at the quiet the way you stare at a room after someone's moved out of it. Ohm rubbed against my ankles, sensing something was wrong the way cats always do. I picked him up and pressed my face into his fur until the shaking in my chest settled. She hadn't just taken the presentation. She'd taken the only thing I had. My phone buzzed. A text from Maeve. "What happened? Everyone's talking but nobody knows anything." I stared at the screen for a long time, trying to find words for what it feels like to watch for years disappear behind someone else's slide deck. Before I could answer, a second message came in. This one from Calder. "We need to talk. Now." I turned my phone face down on the counter and opened my laptop instead. There was work to do. You know that feeling when you've been the reasonable one for so long that reasonable starts to feel like a mistake. I sat at my kitchen table that night with my father's calipers next to my keyboard, and I thought about every late night I'd stayed past 9 to run one more cycle test. Every time Calder had walked past my bench and said, "This is the one." Every time I'd believed him. The truth is, there had been signs before that morning. Small ones. Easy to explain away. Nixera asking for my raw data 3 weeks before the meeting. Nixera staying late in the lab on nights I wasn't scheduled. A missing page from my notebook that I'd told myself I must have misplaced. I hadn't wanted to see it. Believing the worst about someone felt like giving up on them too early. But 2 months before that boardroom, something had shifted. Calder had pulled me into his office alone and told me he was restructuring my role, giving me my own small team, a raise, a real title. For a few weeks I let my guard down completely. I stopped double-checking who had access to my files. I stopped locking my desk drawer at night. I thought, finally, someone here sees what I'm building. That's the part that still gets me. I let myself believe it right before it ended. By tomorrow morning, Calder would realize what I'd protected, and I already knew what would happen next. The next morning came with the artificial calm that sits right before a storm. I showered, dressed carefully, and packed my laptop bag like I was heading into battle, because I was. I need to back up first and tell you what I found 3 weeks earlier, because it's the reason I wasn't afraid walking into that building. It started with something small. I'd gone looking for a data file that should have been in my personal research folder, and found the timestamp wrong. Modified at 10:42 p.m., on a night I hadn't been in the lab at all. I told myself it was a sync error. Then it happened again the following week, a different file, same strange hour. The third time, I didn't explain it away. I pulled the building's batch access logs, the ones my documenting habits had taught me to always keep copies of, going back to my first month at Whitmore Dynamics. My father used to say if you don't write it down, it didn't happen. I wrote everything down. Every test, every result, every date. The log showed Nixera's badge swiping into the lab at 10:38 p.m. on 3 separate nights. Each one, a night before she suddenly had a new insight to share with her father. I didn't confront her. I did something quieter. I created a second private research trail, one with my real methodology, the actual chemistry behind the coding, kept entirely on a drive that never touched the company network. What lived on the shared drive after that point was accurate data, but incomplete. Real results. Missing steps. I filed the incorporation papers for my own company 3 weeks before that boardroom meeting. I hadn't told anyone. Not even Maeve. When I arrived at Whitmore Dynamics that morning, the security guard at the front desk, a heavy-set man named Dorian Pruitt who'd worked there longer than I had, waved me through with a confused look. "Thought you quit yesterday," he said. "Not officially," I said, with a smile that felt like broken glass on my lips. The lab buzzed with a strange, nervous energy. Conversation stopped when I walked past. Maeve caught up to me at my old bench, her voice low and urgent. "Calder's been looking for you since yesterday afternoon. He's furious." "What did you do?" I zipped my coffee mug into my bag. "Nothing he didn't earn." "Coralie, this isn't like you. Tell me what's happening." Before I could answer, Calder's voice cut across the lab floor. "Coralie, my office." Now, the walk there felt like crossing an open field with no cover. Every eye tracked me the whole way. Calder stood in his doorway, face flushed, his suit somehow making him look smaller instead of powerful. "Close the door," he barked when I walked in. I did, then stood waiting. I didn't sit unless invited. A small thing, but it mattered to me. "Where is it?" he demanded. I tilted my head. "Where is what exactly?" "Don't play games. You know what's missing. The investors arrive in an hour to finalize the term sheet, and we can't get the coding process to replicate. The one you were responsible for." I let that sentence sit in the air a moment before I answered. "I'm afraid I don't understand. According to yesterday's meeting, you're moving forward with Nixera's approach. My work isn't needed anymore." His jaw tightened. "Her approach relies on your stabilization chemistry, which is suddenly incomplete in our systems. What did you take?" "I didn't remove anything from company systems, Calder. That would be unethical. And illegal." I let a small, calm smile settle on my face, the kind that comes from realizing your opponent has been bluffing with nothing. Perhaps ask your daughter why her methodology doesn't reproduce her own results. The door opened behind me. Nixera swept in, her composure from yesterday replaced by something close to panic. "Dad, the team can't." She stopped when she saw me. "What is she doing here?" "Collecting my things," I said. "Since you made it clear yesterday my ideas aren't needed." "You did something," she said. "We can't get the process to work." "That's unfortunate." I adjusted my bag on my shoulder. "Have you tried following your own innovative approach? The one you presented so confidently yesterday." Color drained from her face. "I was building on your work." "Were you? That's not what you told 6 investors and your father." I checked my watch. "Now if you'll excuse me, I have a meeting of my own." Calder stepped in front of the door. "You're not leaving until this is fixed." I kept my voice level. "Are you physically blocking my exit, Calder? Because that creates a very different problem for you." The silence stretched. He was many things, but he wasn't foolish enough to find out what that problem looked like. After a long moment he stepped aside. "This isn't over." "Actually it is," I said, walking past him. "I quit yesterday, when your daughter told the room my ideas weren't needed." Behind me, Nixera's voice rose, thin and strained. "She sabotaged us. She must have." I didn't turn around. Outside, the morning air felt like the first clean breath I'd taken in 2 days. I sat in my car in the parking garage and watched the entrance, waiting. 5 minutes later, Fergus Cole arrived with 2 other investors, their press suits and easy strides belonging to people who'd never once walked into a disaster without knowing it. 10 minutes after that, my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again 30 seconds later. I answered. Coralie speaking. This is Fergus Cole. His voice was tight. We need to talk. Not over the phone. Where? Coffee shop across the street. 5 minutes. He hung up before I could respond. When I walked in, he was already in a corner booth, tie slightly askew, a faint sheen on his forehead. I ordered a coffee first and took my time joining him, letting the silence do some of the work. What happened in there? He asked when I sat. You'll have to be more specific. Yesterday your company presented a revolutionary coding process. Today nobody can replicate it, and Calder looks like he's about to have a stroke. That does sound stressful. He leaned forward. 6 of us are prepared to commit 80 million. Not for smoke and mirrors. An interesting dilemma. What do you want? He was direct now, recognizing a negotiation when he was in one. To fix this? I don't work there anymore. That can change. He pulled out his phone. Your salary was what, 95,000? We can triple it plus equity. I shook my head slowly. You're negotiating with the wrong company, Fergus. His eyes narrowed. Meaning what? Meaning I'm not interested in returning to work for Calder. Then what do you want? I let him wait while I took a slow sip of coffee. You're funding a specific piece of chemistry. A protective coating that stabilizes lithium cells through repeated cycling. You've verified it works. That it's reproducible. The preliminary data was compelling. This morning, suddenly nobody can make it work. Doesn't that concern you? It should concern you more that you don't know why. I set my cup down. Let me ask you something. In yesterday's presentation, who did Nixera say developed this process? He thought back. Her team. The company's innovation. Her team. I nodded slowly. Interesting. Understanding moved across his face. You're saying? I'm saying you should be very careful where you put $80 million. Especially when the person presenting it can't actually deliver what she's selling. I stood, leaving my coffee half finished, and slid a blank business card across the table with a phone number written on it. Call this number at 3 o'clock if you'd like to see what actually works. I left him there, staring at the card. By the time I got back to my apartment, my phone was already lighting up. The lab was in chaos. Technicians couldn't reproduce results that had held steady for months. Nixera was blaming faulty equipment. Calder was threatening terminations. Maeve texted. Calder just fired someone for saying the process might be flawed. What is happening? I didn't answer. Instead I opened my laptop and began preparing for 3 o'clock. Everything needed to be exact. At 2:30 my doorbell rang. The security camera showed Calder standing on my porch alone. His car idled at the curb, no driver. I considered not answering. Then I opened the door anyway. This conversation had been coming since the moment I walked out of his office. He looked older than he had that morning. The powerful, sharp-edged man I'd interviewed with 4 years ago was cracking at the edges. May I come in? He asked, and his voice had none of its usual command. I stepped aside and said nothing. He glanced around my apartment, taking in the stacks of engineering journals, the small desk cluttered with test logs. Watching him warily from the top of the bookshelf. The investors walked, he said finally. I'm sorry to hear that. No, you're not. There was no anger left in him now, just exhaustion. You planned this. I planned nothing, Calder. I quit after I was publicly humiliated and had my work taken from me in front of a room of strangers. He winced. Nixera got ahead of herself. She should have credited your work. Credited? The word came out harder than I meant it to. That's an interesting way to describe presenting my chemistry as hers. We can fix this. He sat on my sofa without being asked. Come back. Full credit. A real title. Name your terms. I studied him. This man who had once represented every opportunity I'd ever wanted. Why would I trust you now? Because without you, we lose everything. The company. The funding. You mean I lose everything I built while you let her take the credit? He didn't deny it. Be reasonable, Calder. We both lose if... No, I said. Only you lose. I have a meeting to prepare for. His anger came back fast. With who? That's not your concern anymore. He stood. You can't take our research to competitors. Everything you developed belongs to the company. I didn't take anything that belongs to the company. I promise you that. His eyes narrowed. Then why can't we make it work? I opened the door. Perhaps because chemistry takes understanding, not just slides and confidence. As he stepped out, his phone rang. He glanced at it, and his expression shifted from anger to something closer to fear. We're not finished, he said, already answering the call as he walked to his car. I closed the door and leaned against it, hands trembling slightly. Confrontation had never come easy to me, but I was past the point of needing it to feel comfortable. At 3 o'clock exactly, my phone rang. Hello, Fergus, I answered. Have you decided if you're interested in seeing something that actually works? I'm listening, he said. But I'm not alone. Who's with you? The full investment group. After this morning, we need certainty. I smiled to myself. Text me the address. I'll bring everything you need to see. 2 hours later, I stood in a private conference room downtown in front of 6 of the region's most established investors. No Calder. No Nigsara. Just me and 4 years of work. Before I begin, I said, setting up my equipment, I want to be clear about something. What you're about to see belongs to me, not to Whitmore Dynamics. Fergus leaned forward. That contradicts what we were told yesterday. I imagine a great deal of what you were told yesterday won't hold up. I walked them through the real methodology, step by step, the actual chemistry behind the coding process, and demonstrated results with samples I'd prepared myself. When I finished, the room sat quiet for a long moment. This is remarkable work, Fergus said finally. But it raises serious questions about what happened at Whitmore Dynamics. I can answer those questions, I said. But first I need to know if you're interested in funding the actual innovation, not a presentation about it. A woman near the end of the table, Runa Bellamy, spoke up. Are you saying you've started your own company? 3 weeks ago. Fergus's eyebrows lifted. Before yesterday's meeting? I could see which way things were heading. Calder will fight that claim, Runa said. Let him try. I slid a folder across the table. This documents every step I took to protect my work, reviewed by independent counsel. Fergus opened it, scanning the contents. You've been planning this for months. I've been protecting myself for months, I said. There's a difference. Runa tapped the folder. And what happened this morning? Why couldn't their lab replicate the results? I met her eyes. Because they never understood the process to begin with. They had my numbers, not my methodology. That's devastating for them, Fergus said slowly. Yes, I agreed. It is. The investors exchanged a look, a quiet, silent conversation passing over the table. I stood still, calm on the outside, my stomach in knots underneath. We need to discuss this privately, Fergus said. I began gathering my materials. Of course. No, Runa said, raising a hand. Stay. I have more questions. Your documentation shows you developed this independently, she continued, tapping the folder. But you were employed by Whitmore Dynamics during that time. Most contracts have IP clauses. Mine did as well, I said. Which is why I was careful to develop the critical components on my own time, with my own equipment, after I found evidence someone had been accessing my files without permission. Fergus's eyebrows rose. You have proof of that? Batch logs, I said. I keep records of everything. It's a habit my father taught me before he passed. Her badge swiped into the lab at 10:38 p.m. on 3 separate nights. Each one before she suddenly had new insight to share with her father. The room went quiet in a different way this time. What exactly are you proposing? Fergus finally asked. My company is called Solar Materials. We're seeking investment to bring this coating process to market. Small team. No bloated management. Just people who understand what we're building. Your team is? 4 people currently, myself included. All former Whitmore Dynamics employees who left in the past year over leadership concerns. Runa nodded slowly. You've been planning your exit for some time. I've been protecting my work, I said again. The exit became necessary once it was clear my contributions wouldn't be credited. The meeting ended in handshakes and promises of a term sheet within the week. As I packed up, Fergus caught me by the door. Calder called me 6 times today, he said quietly. That's unfortunate. He says you stole research. That would be projection on his part. He studied me a moment. You knew this would happen. All of it. I knew what kind of people I was dealing with, I said. The rest was just paying attention. That evening I met Maeve at a small diner across town, away from anyone who might recognize us. She looked exhausted, her lab coat traded for a plain sweater that couldn't hide the tension in her shoulders. Calder lost it today, she said, sliding into the booth. Half the senior staff resigned on the spot. The investors pulled out completely. I nodded. I already knew. You did something, she said. You know exactly what happened. I protected myself and my work. And now? What do you want? Recognition for what I built, I said. And to never feel that powerless in a room again. She sat back, studying me. You're starting your own company. 3 weeks ago, actually. Her eyes widened. Before the presentation, I saw where things were heading. She hesitated. Is there room for another chemist? I thought you'd never ask. 3 weeks later, my lawyer, a calm woman named Avellini Marsh with an office that smelled like old paper and stronger coffee than mine, called with news. Calder had filed an emergency injunction to block me from using the coding research. A judge denied it, citing the documentation I'd filed weeks before anyone knew to look for it. He's floundering, Avellini told me, making desperate moves without proper groundwork. By the following afternoon, industry newsletters were circulating rumors. Whitmore Dynamics stock had dropped. Board members were calling emergency sessions. Through a contact who still worked there, I learned Nixera had been quietly removed from her position. I didn't feel the satisfaction I expected. Instead, there was a strange emptiness, the kind that follows when something that consumed you for years suddenly lets go. That night, working late in the small lab space I'd rented above a hardware store on Grant Street, my phone buzzed with a security alert. The camera showed Nixera at the door, nothing like the confident woman who'd walked into my boardroom weeks earlier. Her hair was pulled back carelessly, her blazer wrinkled. Against my better judgment, I let her in. This is it, she said, glancing around the modest space. This is what beat us. You beat yourselves, I said. I just refused to go down with you. She sank into the nearest chair. My father won't speak to me. The board removed me this morning. Everything's gone. What did you expect, taking someone else's chemistry without understanding it? I didn't take it, she said automatically, then stopped herself. I adapted it. Improved the presentation. Chemistry isn't a presentation, Nixera. It's ours nobody sees. There are no shortcuts. She looked up at me, and for the first time I saw past the polish to something smaller underneath. How did you know? How did you plan for all of this? I paid attention to details, to patterns, to people. While you were reading my notebooks, I was reading you. She stood to leave, pausing at the door. You planned this from the beginning. No, I said. I just built options for myself while you and your father were busy eliminating yours. After she left, I sat alone in the lab, surrounded by equipment I'd bought with my own savings. Smaller than what I'd had at Whitmore Dynamics. But mine. My phone rang. Fergus, without preamble this time. The groups finalized their decision. $60 million to start, with performance milestones that could take it to 100. I closed my eyes and let that settle over me. There's something else, he said. Calder's being removed as CEO. The board's lost confidence entirely. I see. They asked about you. As a possible replacement. I laughed, surprised. I'm flattered. But no. I'm building something of my own now. Figured you'd say that. Worth asking. The next morning, a courier delivered a small package to my apartment. Inside was my original lab notebook, the one that had gone missing from my desk months earlier. A note was tucked inside the cover, in Calder's handwriting. You've won. Was it worth it? I closed the notebook and held it for a long moment, feeling the weight of 4 years in my hands. The answer came that afternoon, when I walked into our new lab space and found Maeve and 2 other chemists already setting up equipment. They looked up as I walked in, and on their faces was something I'd rarely been given in 4 years at Whitmore Dynamics. Respect. Ready to build something that lasts? I asked. Their answering smiles told me everything I needed. Yes. It was worth it. Here is the thing I wish someone had told me before any of this started. Love does not require you to lay down your own measurements. You are allowed to check. You are allowed to measure twice, even when you want to believe. Especially when you want to believe. Because love that cannot survive a second measurement is not love. It is a loan you were never going to get back. I still carry my father's brass calipers in my lab coat pocket. Not because I need them for work anymore. Because they remind me that the truth always measures out the same, no matter who's holding the tape. And if you don't write it down, it didn't happen. Measure twice. Write it down. Build something that lasts. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and telling the truth? Knowing the truth would cost you everything familiar? Tell me which one you chose.